Hi, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the second episode of Cutting Through Conversations That Go Beyond the Plate. I hope everyone is safe and well. It's been a rather windy day. I've had a couple of pots breaking, but I hope everyone else has been safe and well. And Sudip is here, so I am going to get him on. And we're just waiting for him. But thank you everyone for joining in. And today's topic, there you are, Sudip.
Hi,
Good
Antoine.
evening. Good to see you. All well?
Good to all well, all well. You can hear me?
Yes, I can hear you very, very
Perfect.
clearly.
Perfect.
So we're going to start right away. No point waiting till everyone joins in. Our conversation today is going to be centering around health and nutrition and diet in the period of the lockdown.
Mhm.
But before I start and before I introduce Sudeep, just a couple of thoughts that I had about the topic and about when I was writing the headlines. And I realized that when we're talking about healthy eating and we're talking about nutrition, we are talking about a subject, about a topic that reveals our privilege. That when we are talking about being able to eat well, we are assuming that we don't have to worry where our food is going to come from. That none of us, neither me nor Sudeep nor any of you who are watching this show, has to worry about where the food will come for the next week, the next month, maybe even the next year as well. So I am fully aware that when we talk about healthy eating, when we talk about nutrition, it is a subject of the privilege, and that which it doesn't make it unfair at all, that we still need to eat well and we still need to eat healthy. That's important for us as well. But it's something that you also should keep in mind. And I think because we are privileged, it's our opportunity to help those who are going through a very, very difficult time in this lockdown. So that was all that I needed to say. And I would like to introduce Sudip Putatunda, who is the founder and managing director of Coldplay Ice Creams. So, hi everyone. Good to see all of you all here. But so Sudip has been working with a couple of companies, and he is a graduate with honors in BSc in food science from the University of Reading in the UK. He worked as a development scientist with Mondelez, which was previously Kraft Foods, and then he took over as a director with the Valentine Group, and finally set up Coldplay Ice Creams about 4 or 5 years ago. And if you have eaten an ice cream at any five-star restaurant, at any fine dining restaurant, at any high-end banqueting event, you have eaten one of Sudeep's ice creams. But we're not here to talk about ice cream. We're here to talk about diet and nutrition, which is also one of his specialized subjects. So just to start off with, Sudeep, one of the first things that I actually did when the lockdown started was to go out and buy a packet of vitamin D, because I
Mhm.
had already been diagnosed as being low on vitamin D, and I realized immediately lockdown means that no exposure to the sun, and that I would have to take vitamin supplements. So
Mhm.
I think that is something that, I'm not sure how many people are aware. And why do we actually need to take vitamin B? How important is it to us in terms of our digestion and other functionings?
Absolutely. Before I get into vitamin D, I'd like to say a couple of quick points. One, in addition to what you said about the fact that most of us right now listening to this
Hmm.
are very privileged in terms of the nutrition that we get. And one
Right.
of the things that a lot of scientists and a lot of the food processing community, I mean, maybe not the owners of the companies, but at least the science community does, is we go to the government and ask them to enable fortification. It is in our lifetime that iodine was compulsorily fortified in salt, and then
Hmm.
fluorides in toothpaste and so on. And it wasn't always the case. And we need to make sure that so that the masses get some of the micronutrients that we take for granted, that the government does enforce fortification in more and more foods as they
Hmm.
are in the West. And sometimes this is put off due to cost concerns. But we need to ensure that for the proper development of those not as fortunate to get all the vegetables and all the food, that
Hmm.
a basic micronutrient fortification is enforced by the government. So that is a small
Right.
point I want to do. In fact, vitamin D is something that is fortified in Canada, the States, and even parts of Europe. But in
Right.
just when I was preparing for our chat, I looked up and it is not fortified in India, unfortunately.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
it is vitamin D, just to quickly give context, is a fat soluble vitamin. It's one of the micronutrients that we require. There are two forms of it, D2 and D3. D3 in particular is produced by epidermal, like on a skin, and
Right.
uh, and it's produced only with exposure to UV light, which we get mainly from the sun.
Hmm.
Um, uh, the problem is that even though we're in a tropical country, we face a couple of disadvantages. One is we hate the sun, and
Yeah.
therefore we always do everything in our possibility to stay away from it. We also do have dark skin, which reduces the ability of
Right.
vitamin D formation. And one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this with you is the normal summer period when we do get exposure to the sun, whether we like it or not. This year we have spent indoors due to the
Hmm.
lockdown. And as a consequence, I would believe that a lot of us are probably deficient on vitamin D. Even not just people like you who are probably pre-diagnosed, but even those who assume that they are okay with vitamin D. If you go a few days, you're probably all right. But when it's weeks on end and then months on end, and now that the lockdown hopefully is going to ease in the near future, we don't know, of course,
Right.
depending on circumstances, we are entering the monsoon, and so the weather is going to be overcast. So even
Right.
though some of us will go out, we might still not get the sun. And therefore, vitamin D is critical. Vitamin D has a lot of functions, but I'll stick to two main functions that I'd like to cover right now. That is,
Hmm.
it aids the intestinal absorption of calcium and magnesium. Both of
Okay.
these minerals, they come under macro minerals. Uh, so you need a good quantity of them. A micro mineral is actually a trace mineral. It's less than 100 milligrams. In this case, you need more than that per day. Uh,
Okay.
the obvious thing that it affects when we all think of calcium is our bones and our teeth.
Yeah.
But in addition to that, it also would affect our mental health, our skin, our health, our hair. Within women, a lot of premenstrual conditions develop if you're deficient on calcium and magnesium. And prolonged periods, of course, when you're very young, vitamin D is caused rickets back in the day, because
Right.
if you've
Right.
got bad bones. With time and with weeks and months, this could lead to long-term complications like osteoporosis. And in our culture, so many of our nannies and grandmothers get knee replacements and hip replacements, and a lot of that
Absolutely.
might have to do with actually poor calcium intake. And
Hmm.
that
Hmm. Hmm.
in two ways. One is we have a low calcium diet, especially those of us who don't have dairy regularly. I mean, some of us drink milk very regularly, but those
But you're
of us
saying
who are
even if you're
vegan,
drinking a lot of milk, the absence of vitamin D is going to be a
we
problem.
absolutely, absolutely. Which
Yeah.
is why you'll see a lot of the like, I don't want to take brand names, but the beverages like Complan, Horlicks, and so on. They will
Yeah.
not only put calcium in there, they will fortify it with vitamin D. Even
Okay.
calcium sandos and some calcium tablets fortified the medicine with vitamin D because calcium, if you just take it in, but if the intestine can't absorb it, it's pointless. It'll just pass through you. So
Right.
vitamin D
Right.
is what enables the absorption of that calcium and other minerals as well into the body. So we need to
Okay.
ensure we're getting sufficient calcium, and then we need to also ensure that we're getting the vitamins that enable the absorption of that calcium.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
Yes.
Uh, yeah. So the other one that of course is the big one, and like everyone has been touting it as like this miracle vitamin, and like have vitamin C and you're like protected from corona and all that. Are we like getting enough of vitamin C in our diets right now? What's the best way to be taking it in?
So vitamin C is ascorbic acid. I mean, some because it's in citrus fruit. Sometimes people think it's citric acid, but the classic source of vitamin C is citric fruits. I mean, for the longest time, I think in school we all read about how Captain Cook used to force his people to have onions and things so they didn't get scurvy,
Right.
back in the day. So that was actually one of the
Yeah, yeah,
first
yeah.
vitamin deficiencies identified, vitamin C
Hmm.
deficiency. And because sailors would get it because they wouldn't have access to a lot of fresh vegetables and fruits. And we get, thankfully in India, because of our vegetable consumption is higher than in the West, we do get
Hmm.
vitamin C. But if you want to really ensure that it does enough of a job for immunity, then you require to have more than just a normal amount.
Okay.
Classic Indian traditional one source would be amla. Chavanprash has
Yeah,
got
yeah, yeah.
amla in it, and that's a very good source of vitamin C. Citrus fruits. That apart, broccoli is a good source of vitamin C.
Really?
Even papaya, if I'm not mistaken. So
Okay.
it's not just the citrus fruits. I mean, of course, those are the classic sources, but you would
Hmm.
even get it from leafy vegetables. So I
Okay.
would say
So,
that
so
is good.
most of us kind of think that, just adding nimbu to the food and, that is pretty much enough. And, or maybe just a nimbu pani. Is that a good enough source in these conditions, particularly for vitamin C?
So okay, so before I give any kind of, I don't think it's been proven that vitamin C can help with corona or COVID, right? So
Yeah,
I don't want to
let's
say
keep
like,
that out.
yeah.
No, let's just
So
talk about being
there are two.
quarantined and yeah.
Yeah. So vitamin C is a water soluble vitamin, and it can be taken with limbu pani. Your body will absorb it perfectly well. You can, but of course, I would say that don't just take it from a single source. Like, okay, I'm taking limbu pani, so I'm sorted. Ensure that
Hmm.
you have a more holistic sort of basket of sources. So different citrus fruits, and that is in fact something that I was going to come to
Hmm.
maybe later on. That whenever we are talking about any one particular source, that source might often have a negative consequence even like, if you can have acidity or other things. So whenever
Right.
you're looking for whatever vitamin, mix up your sources. Don't just rely on a single source. So if you're having limbu pani, go for it. But if you really want to up your intake of vegetables, something I learned from my father, he would say, eat a rainbow, eat as many colors as you can,
Right.
because
Right.
those are normally good source of antioxidants, different vitamins, and a few other things.
Okay.
I don't know if this is the right time, but I'll just quickly mention one more thing in the
Hmm.
context of vitamin D and C. That
Yeah.
while you have the basic uh, vitamin that you're consuming, it is normally doing the job of intestinal absorption or as a cell receptor or something like that to keep your body going. Almost like a hormone. In fact, I mean, vitamin D is very close to like a hormone, like the body would
Right.
naturally
Right.
produce. But one of the things that we should also consider is not only taking these supplements, but reducing the leeches that we consume. Now, what are leeches? Leeches are things that even if I'm consuming a lot of a good thing, if something
Right.
is going to leach it out of my system,
Hmm.
then it undoes that. And leeches would be things like alcohol and
Okay.
things like caffeine, even sometimes. Cigarette smoking is also a leecher because it pulls out a lot of antioxidants from your body. And therefore, these are the kind of things that we should sometimes think about what we're doing. I mean, alcohol can reduce your calcium intake by almost 50-55%. So, I mean, you can have all the vitamin D that you want, but and I know in the lockdown, a lot of people, their alcohol consumption has gone through the roof, because they have not much else to
Absolutely.
do.
Yeah. Well,
So we need to
actually,
be
that's what
careful
I
about
mean,
that.
just list. I mean, smoking and drinking have been like things that have been getting people through the lockdown. So,
I know.
that's a bit of a challenge there.
No, I know what you mean. And a lot of my friends, I keep talking to them and they're like, oh, I'm having a drink. And normally when we are drinking, an occasional drink, we are going out, we're also burning off that alcohol, so to speak.
Right.
But right now we are in very highly static conditions. We're sitting in the same room and not doing much exercise. And therefore the negative impact of alcohol is further increased, not just in the toll it takes on our liver, but the toll it
Yeah.
takes on our overall immunity.
Right, right. So just before we move on, actually, there's a question that I've got, and which I think I'd like to take right away, and that is we're talking about, and this is from Darshane Walekar, and it says for vitamin D, what is a substitute for vegans? So I think this is where we talked about this a couple of we talked about calcium and vegans a couple of weeks ago. So what what does a vegan do for for vitamin D and calcium kind of a balance?
Goes out in the sun whenever he can. My suggestion is genuinely okay. D2 you can get from some mushrooms if you have access to them. I know it's not very common in India, but shiitake mushrooms are a big source of vitamin D2. But even
Oh,
other
really?
types of other types of
Okay.
fungus can also give you D2. But
Okay.
D3, unfortunately, even though if you go online and look for it, you'll find that there are some vegetarian sources of D3. But genuinely, I don't know if they translate into the human body. So they might be found in the plant, but they don't really translate. The main way
Yeah.
the human body gets D3 is actually from the sun. So even as if you're going out, the government is thinking of allowing people to go out for a walk. Try and do the walk in the sun and don't stay scared of the sun. And
Okay.
traditionally, even, we are always told to do exercises, like Surya Namaskar and things in the open sun. And there's a reason for that because don't shy away from the sun is my main point as far as D3 is concerned. Unfortunately, as a primarily vegetarian country, we don't have too many other sources.
Okay. Just one more question, which we have from Zainab, who asks, well, you said that alcohol is bad, but does that apply to red wine as well? Because red wine is actually considered to be a panacea for many things. So how is that? Does that also act as a leech?
Okay. I assume this is the common Jainab that we know, but
Mm-hmm.
no. See, the the thing about red wine is that I'll just take a minute on this. There was something called the French paradox. We studied this in nutrition, where the
Okay.
French would eat a lot of cheese-heavy food and things like that,
Right.
and yet they
Yeah.
would have a lower rate of heart condition disease compared to many
Right.
other populations. And so a lot
Yeah.
of people try to figure out, how are they getting away with this? And
Hmm.
in time, it was found that grape seed and grape skin have got positive medicinal values, so to speak,
Yeah.
in that they are full of flavonoids and polyphenols and tannins
And
and
the
antioxidants
resveratrol.
like that.
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's
Yeah.
better. However, and this is, I mean, not very good news, but we have yet to find a clear indication of a positive correlation between red wine and better heart disease and so on conditions
Okay.
in a proper study. In fact,
Hmm.
the fact that people who have red wine have better health, probably that correlation has to more to do with lifestyle and affluence than actually the direct effect of red wine. So while red wine does have certain positive ingredients in it, it doesn't seem to have it in sufficient quantities to actively improve your health. So
So
I'll give.
at the moment, would you say that red wine is a better drink to be having
Oh,
in the quarantine than others, or it doesn't
see,
really make a difference?
so it was similarly found that Japanese who have a lot of sake also have better health, and that's a completely wide drink. But I would say that it's definitely better than, let's say, beer or some hard liquors like whiskey, because those
Right.
actually do more damage. Beer because of the glycerin in it and the other kind of things that are put into it, which are the non-alcohol part, which are completely no good. And hard alcohol simply because of the stress that it puts on your body, because you end up having a lot of alcohol and then it does a lot of vitamin inhibition and affects the liver. So if you have
Yeah.
to have a drink, I would say go.
Okay. Okay. Hi. I'm glad you brought up the idea of stress because that's another thing that many people are dealing with right now.
Hmm.
Stress, anxiety, being cooped up all day.
Hmm. Hmm.
Not everyone is used to living like this,
Hmm.
being kind of constrained within four walls, not meeting anybody, no face-to-face or physical interactions apart from this thing.
Hmm.
Uh, so, is there a way to kind of counterbalance that through our diet? Is there better things to eat or worse things that we should avoid?
Uh, yes, I mean, it's not just the physical toll of being at home. I think a lot of us are going through professional and financial stress as well. I mean, even if it's put off, a lot of the people are worrying about their business.
Hmm,
I mean, in the restaurant industry, I mean, it's we're all
sure.
stressed out about what's going to happen. And of course, irrespective of industry, people are worried about professional outlook and so on, and their financial
Sure,
outlook.
sure.
And one of the things that it's common knowledge now, of course, that stress does is it changes your eating pattern and your sleep pattern and the other things it does. And one of the ways it does it is through something called cortisol. I think some of us might have heard of it. So when we are
Hmm.
stressed, we normally have a fight or flight kind of reaction. The body doesn't know whether it's a tiger in front of us or both stress. It just feels stress, and
Hmm.
uh, and therefore heartbeat goes up when we are anxious and we're stressed. It's the same reaction, and the body responds with putting out two or three different hormones. Basically, adrenaline famously is the main fight and flight hormone.
Right.
But then there's something called cortisol that is also given out by the adrenal glands. And cortisol, unfortunately, has a much longer momentum than adrenaline. So adrenaline will come and go, but cortisol
Yeah.
sort of remains longer. And what cortisol does is, in response to the fight and flight kind of feedback that the body is like the stress that it's under, it will prevent glucose from being used in its normal manner, in blood glucose, because it
Hmm.
wants to reserve that glucose for the muscle. So in case we need to have a fight or we need to run away, it wants to
Yeah.
reserve the glucose. And so what happens is something very interesting happens when our glucose isn't allowed to be used in its normal function. It does it by suppressing insulin, by the way. So it messes up our insulin balance. And it also
Okay.
makes the normal cells that are looking for that regular input of glucose starve for glucose. So our sugar craving then goes up. So even though it's not allowing sugar to be used,
Yeah.
it's not that the body still feels it's kind of thirsty for sugar, right? So our sugar cravings go up. The excess sugar that we actually don't end up using, either fighting or running away, we are just sat in one place stressing out, ends up eventually getting turned into fat. And our insulin balance is all over the place because now it's dropped, and later we'll have to overcompensate for this additional sugar in the blood. And what
Right.
therefore happens is we put on weight, we get huge sugar hunger pangs. And I read in Harvard Health Review was one of the things was they said that comfort food truly is comfort food. I mean, they've proven it scientifically. You have a high sugar, high fat, like a Snicker bar, and you will feel better and less stressed. And
Yeah.
that is the most dangerous thing because it works, right? So you keep doing it and then you
Yeah.
form
Yeah.
a habit, and this is also depression eating. And
Is
what
that the
we
same
need
as
to do,
stress eating?
yes, exactly. Stress eating and depression eating. Are, I mean, anxiety is different from stress per se, so I don't want to conflate the
Hmm.
two, but you can call
Okay.
them like sort of cousins of each other in the way that they affect your hormones and therefore affect your eating.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
what happens, what we can do is one, be aware of the fact that when I'm stressed, this is what is happening. My cortisol levels are going up, and I'm getting additional hunger. And so therefore try to de-stress, but play with a pet, do something else. But if you can't do that and the anxiety still remains, there are a few foods that we can eat. Green tea or even black tea for that matter. Dark chocolate is good. Dark chocolate, because it doesn't have the sugar,
Okay.
it reduces the cortisol level and the stress level for
So
chemical
you mean
reactions
bitter
as well as,
chocolate? Do you mean
yeah, I
bitter
mean,
chocolate? Yeah.
just chocolate with low sugar. I mean,
Okay.
which in turn will be bitter chocolate. Even high sugar chocolate would do it, but then the sugar is undoing the good that the chocolate is doing, so
Sure.
there's no point. So just low sugar chocolate, which we call dark chocolate, that would help reduce your cortisol levels. Tea, even probiotics. And one of the things I would say to avoid is caffeine. Caffeine intake, and a lot of people, my mom, my wife, they just keep having coffee all day, and I keep telling them that one of the things that does is caffeine elevates your body's stress signals. So it will actually cause cortisol to be given. And you get palpitations sometimes after
Yeah.
you have
Yeah.
too much
Yeah.
caffeine and so on. So try to avoid coffee to the extent possible, because coffee does lead to a similar kind of a response that increases hunger pangs. And a good replacement for coffee, and if you need that caffeine, is probably tea, because in
Okay.
tea the caffeine is not released as strongly. I mean, it does have
Hmm.
caffeine, but it's sort of bungled up with the tannins of the tea, so it doesn't come out to your blood in one shot. So
Okay.
if you ideally don't have it, if you have to, then have it in the form of black tea or even better green tea.
Green tea. Okay. So I think we just had another question on vitamin D, and that was uh, D360. Is that a good option to be taking right now?
It, D 360.
Yeah.
One. No, I don't. Is that a brand? I'm sorry. It could possibly is. If it is a vitamin D, is it the caps, the little yellow capsules? I think that is a brand of vitamin D. This thing, but
Okay.
I don't want to. I don't want to suggest any particular brand per se. I could give a couple. If this is a from a reputed company, then sure. But you've got things like Zincovit or Beta Dexamine, and even this 360 probably. But before I would suggest, please have a chat with your GP or a doctor, because vitamins, one of the things to remember is if you get it through food, it's almost impossible to get so much that you'll have a toxic level. But if you're taking a lot of supplements, there is a toxicity level for every vitamin, just like for
Okay.
every nutrient. So you can potentially overdose on it. So do have a chat with your nutritionist or a doctor, or whatever. But if you're a typically healthy person, then a good company. Another thing that has a lot of vitamins, incidentally, before I complete, is breakfast cereals. Don't have the ones that are filled with sugar, like say Fruit
Yeah.
Loops or whatever. But if it's like a special K or a breakfast cereal that's low on sugar, most of them
What
are
about muesli?
pre-fortified. Yeah, muesli also. Uh,
Okay.
Look for the fortification. I know Bagri's does a good muesli. I like that, but I think Kellogg's does as well. But if they are well fortified, the breakfast cereals can also be a good source of a more quote unquote natural source or the food source of the vitamins, rather than just taking the capsules. But normally,
Okay.
a vitamin capsule, a B complex, or a D360 or anything like that is also a good idea.
Okay. Now we also I wanted to touch about the idea of gut flora, and
Hmm.
more and more science is showing that, more than any other part of the body, gut flora actually what determines really your health.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is depends on what you eat and how you're eating, and
Hmm.
the mix of food. So what would you imagine has been the situation right now? What is happening with the gut flora in our body, and how do we kind of make sure that it's balanced and at optimum condition?
Absolutely. See, gut flora, unfortunately, is one of the least understood, and because it's one of the most recent sciences in terms of human health. Typically, for the last 150 years or however long, when we want to analyze somebody's health, we take a blood sample and then we get a few results, and then we sort of figure, okay, then this is my prescription. But
Hmm.
it would seem that an equivalent, if not as much, then almost as much of an indicator of a health as, let's say, a blood profile, would actually be a gut profile in terms of the
Hmm.
balance of your good bacteria to bad bacteria. And just one bit of trivia that I love sharing with people, and they're always amazed, is we actually have more bacteria cells in our body than human cells.
Yeah.
Like we
Yeah.
have something like about 20 to 30 trillion human cells and somewhere between 40 and 80 trillion bacterial cells. So some much smaller,
Wow.
but it's almost double the number of cells. So we actually, in some ways, more bacteria than human. Yeah. But
Hmm.
the reason I bring this up is because a lot of health conditions, and including gut absorption, just like the vitamins, are determined by our gut makeup, the bacteria that we have in our intestines, the small
Right.
and large one. And they also a lot of food allergies, and like nowadays, a lot of people are intolerant to a lot of things. Some of it is
Hmm.
genetic, of course, but a lot of it is progressively being found to be actually not genetic, but just the makeup of our gut flora. And that we
Yeah.
can't, that certain foods give us bloating and give us other kinds of reactions simply because our system isn't able to digest it because we just don't have the right bacteria in our system to digest it, so to speak.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
the best way to, and as far as the lockdown is concerned, I think the way it's most messed up is our circadian rhythm, which for those who don't know, is the 24-hour
The
cycle,
24-hour
sleep
rhythm.
and
Yeah.
yeah, and wake up. That's completely messed up. I mean, a bunch of my friends are waking up much earlier than they used to. A bunch of them are
Hmm.
waking up much later because people are working from home, right? And so there isn't an
Yeah.
alarm anymore. And
Yeah.
when that goes for a toss, so does your gut flora. And
Yeah. Yeah.
along with that, when we increase our alcohol consumption, alcohol, as we all know, it kills bacteria. That's why we use it as a sterilizer. That can affect our gut flora. Antibiotic courses, if you have done one soon after that, that will affect. And the gut flora in turn affects a whole bunch of things. Like it can affect even your psychology. In fact, a lot of psychiatrists nowadays prescribe probiotics and prebiotics as part of their treatment. You have
Okay.
a lot of
Sudip, would you just define what probiotics and prebiotics are for people who don't exactly understand?
certainly. So probiotic is the actual microorganism per se. So that is the good bacteria, as we call it. A
Yeah,
prebiotic
give us
is
examples of what a probiotic food and a prebiotic food would be.
Okay, sure. So a probiotic food would be one which is loaded with good bacteria, right? So, for example, typically fermented foods, because I mean fermentation is the process of the bacterial
Hmm.
growth. So dahi, for example, is a great source. Kimchi, sauerkraut, any of these things are good sources of probiotics. Of course, if you take
Right.
supplements what's that famous Japanese one that everybody takes nowadays? But the little small bottles, the name is eluding me right now. But there are a
Okay.
whole bunch of probiotic supplements nowadays available um, that you can have, and you've got probiotic yogurts and dahis which are now available in the market. A
Yeah.
prebiotic is a food that helps the good bacteria grow. Okay, so once you do
Hmm.
have the good bacteria in place, you need a prebiotic for it to proliferate and grow. Now, typically, these good bacteria like high fiber foods. So, a prebiotic would typically be either a supplement or a food that is high in the kind of the food for the bacteria, so to speak, rather than
Right.
fast. So, high fiber foods could be like beans, beans, oats, even bananas, for example. Something I do at home I mean, chia seeds are very expensive, but if you can have them, great. Otherwise, even good old sabza is very
Hmm.
good in fiber. You can just put sabza in cool water with some limbu pani and a bit of honey, and you've covered a lot of what you need you to do. Right?
Oh wow. Okay.
I actually put a little bit of haldi in it as well, because
Oh.
that's very antioxidant rich. So my wife and I occasionally we'll have sabza with lime water and haldi and a bit of honey as
Wow.
a
I have only
sweetener.
had sabza and a faluda, so this is like completely revolutionary for me. But
No,
yeah, okay.
I just saw somebody mention Yakult is the little Japanese drink. I
Okay,
was
but
trying to remember. Sorry.
yeah.
But yeah, I would recommend this to everybody. I learned the Sabza trick from a friend of mine who is really into yoga and good health. And he doesn't have water as it is. He will have water. The bottles of water he keeps in his fridge always have Sabza in it. So while he's
Okay.
drinking water, he's consuming Sabza through the day, and it's neutral and it's a very good source of fiber. It gives you protein. It adds almost, I mean, the carbs that are in it are almost all fiber. It almost adds no, and it also has, I mean, I don't know the science behind this, but I've heard it soaks up a lot of oils and things like that that could be causing issues. So I would
And
recommend
sabza
Sabza as
is
a
basically basil seed.
basil seed, absolutely. Uh,
Yeah.
uh, Internationally, you will see that most of the literature is on chia seed in this thing, but my understanding is basil seed will do just as good a job and it's much cheaper. So just go for basil seed. Use it, drink it with water whenever you feel like it's. Since you asked me for an example of a good prebiotic, I think that would be one. But
Okay.
generally,
Okay.
isabgol, for example, is also a prebiotic in a sense. I mean, anything that's high fiber that we don't digest but our gut good bacteria would digest is potentially a prebiotic.
Okay. Sudeep, actually, we have already crossed our time limit, so
Oh,
which is fine. And yeah, I
that
know.
was great.
So,
It flew.
but is there anything else that you would like to add that you would like to summarize? Perhaps, maybe tell us a couple of things that we should be eating right now, given that we're not getting any kind of sunlight, that it is the
Hmm.
monsoon that we are going into,
Hmm.
that, well, we still have restricted mobility,
Hmm.
and we're not looking at a great variety. I mean, it's the monsoon, so we're looking at fewer fruits and vegetables. Is there things that will cover all of these elements? Anything that you think would be great for us?
I would give a two-part answer to that. I would say that there's no one magic food, but of course,
No, never,
if you
never.
can if you can have green tea, please have it. You can have a high fiber diet, please have that because it'll help your gut flora and so on. Have have colored foods. When I say colored foods, I mean not
Hmm.
artificially colored, but like have
Yeah,
papaya one day, have an
papaya.
orange the next day, have a broccoli the next day, because those typically, as a rule of thumb, like they say, white foods are full of carbs, colored foods are normally full of antioxidants and vitamins and so on.
That's a good rule to
Ginger and
remember.
garlic ginger and garlic are also good.
Yeah.
Whenever possible, they have anti-inflammatory effects and so on. But and the second part, so these are the positive things you should do. And the
Yeah.
second thing is if we can cut down on some of the negatives, mainly
Hmm.
alcohol and
Yeah,
smoking and
that's a
caffeine.
difficult
I,
one. Yeah.
but to the extent possible, try and keep it on the down low. That would be my suggestion. And if you do get a chance, just get as much sunlight as you can.
Okay, okay, great. Well, Sudeep, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for speaking to everybody. As always, it's not simply a pleasure to speak to you, but it's always a learning opportunity.
Thank you
And
so much. You're very kind, Antoine. I always learn
not
from
at all.
you.
And as I started out, I'd like to just finish and remind everyone that yes, this was a discussion of the privileged, and that even though we are that, I think it's important that we do try and help everyone else who is not as fortunate as us. So that's a final idea I'd like to leave with you, apart from eating healthy. And the series continues. We just finished with 2 episodes. Next week, we have Magandeep Singh, who is one of India's top sommeliers. And Monday evening, Magan and I will be discussing our favorite wine movies. So do join us, 6 p.m. Monday evening. Thank you, Sudeep. Thank you,
Thank
everyone. Stay safe, stay well.